Sometimes we're experiencing something, but we don't really understand why our body is responding the way that it is and why our mind is feeling so full and, just kind of overwhelmed. And it feels like kind of that we're out of control of the situation. Hi, I'm so glad you guys are back with us this week. We're talking to Mellisa Parnell again, and we're going to dive into the whole stress cycle and how that affects burnout with our pastors that are watching, and any leader really can apply these things to their lives. But we're focusing on pastors this week. I wanted to tell you a little tidbit about Mellisa. She is actually a twin who is married to her and her twin are married to brothers. So how did that happen, Mellisa?
It's legal, actually,
Okay,
come to find out. Yeah,
oh
my goodness.
Married to two brothers, but you guys are twins.
We are.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, my twin sister, we both met her husband, and they, were dating, and they decided they were getting married. And when they decided they were getting married, she said, I went over to his parents' house and he has a brother. Let's have a double wedding. And I said, you are so silly.
Yeah.
And then it happened 3 years later.
Oh my gosh. I love that story. That's so great. Well, thanks for giving us a little picture into your life, Mellisa. So tell us a little bit about how the stress cycle impacts burnout. I would love to, sometimes we're experiencing something, but we don't really understand why our body is responding the way that it is and why our mind is feeling so full and, just kind of overwhelmed. And it feels like kind of that we're out of control of the situation, and it helps to kind of understand what's actually happening. So I'd love for you to explain that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, recapping on what we talked about last week, we're looking at, burnout being the three components of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and this decreased sense of accomplishment. So historically, when we're looking at stress, God created us to develop and manage stress in a very specific way. So, in fact, I was talking to a leader this week, and he's a business owner up in the Seattle area, and he had his first panic attack ever. He's about 35 years old, experienced a panic attack, and he had been doing all the right things, waking up, starting his day in the Word, really reckoning with hard things, taking his thoughts captive, spending time in prayer, and yet stress goes somewhere.
Right.
I loved that he used those words. I learned one thing is stress goes somewhere.
Yeah.
So what we want to recognize is, back at, the time when we were created, we experienced a stressor. So let's just say that we see a cougar, and this cougar, Angela's walking along a trail, and there's a cougar that notices her. So this cougar notices you from across the path, and you're kind of peeking back and forth, and you're watching as this cougar starts to track you.
Oh.
Now, as the cougar starts to track you, you're perceiving this threat.
Right.
And as you perceive the threat, you begin to run. Yeah. And as you begin to run, that cougar begins to run.
Oh, it just sounds terrible.
So you're experiencing the stressor, you're experiencing the perception, you are in an all-out sprint back to your tents with your comrades.
Right.
And as you're sprinting back, your team and your family and your friends and your community, they look up from their chores and from making dinner, and they recognize, holy cow, Angela is sprinting and there's a cougar right on her tail.
Yeah.
So what happens? Mm-hmm. You have a team that's behind you. Someone picks out a spear, someone picks up an arrow, and they start charging that cougar. You turn around, you notice that you have a team. That cougar gets shot.
Yeah.
It drops.
I feel better.
You do. You feel better. So you take this, your heart is racing. You've had this extreme stress moment. What happens then? Yeah. Your friends, your relatives, they come up and they hug you and you cry. Yeah. And you say, holy cow, this was so overwhelming and stressful. we're here, I'm alive, we're so thankful you're alive. Then we cook the cougar. We're celebrating that Angela is alive, she's well, everything's great. And you're creating this celebration of life that you made it out of this extreme high stress experience.
Right.
Now, within the way that God designed our bodies to manage stress, you were able to have several stress cycle completers in this process of not getting eaten by a cougar.
Okay.
And they're all very physical elements of who we are and how we process things. So one of which was running, right? Yeah. Running is an extreme form of a stress cycle completion production.
Yeah. Another was heart rate goes up.
Yep, exactly. You're experiencing endorphins, the cortisol is released, you're achieving this, exertion, and then you can come down because the stressor has been mitigated. So if you think about all these different ways that we're able to combat stress in previous, life cycles and how things have been going, today we live in a very different world.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. And so today we may sit down at an elder meeting, and the threat may in fact be an elder at the table.
That's very different.
It's very different. And so the gut reaction that says, I'm under threat, I'm perceiving stress, maybe this, this gut reaction to say, I need to punch someone.
Yeah.
But then our bodies and our brains say, well, that's not appropriate. I obviously cannot punch an elder at our table. So then we kind of hold things in and we reckon with it and we process it internally, and we provide a really well-balanced manner in which we produce, some good conversation. We leave the meeting and that stress and that stressor compiles over time.
Okay. I'm getting it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like he said, it goes somewhere. And so we didn't have the endorphin release. We didn't have, our bodies didn't, heart pound. It didn't, and then it didn't calm down. We just had all this stuff going on internally, and then the stress went somewhere.
Yeah. I think really a great way.
Yeah.
A great way to think about it is, there's a difference between emotional regulation, which is the actual physical and emotional processing of stressors, and emotional management, where we're able to show up collected.
Yeah.
We have to regulate.
Yeah. Okay.
Or it will continue to build.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can show up collected, but the regulation part is where you actually process, is what you're saying. You're processing those emotions. You're naming it. Yeah, you're doing some of the work that it would take to release the stress.
Yeah, and I think often we think, when we're experiencing high stress, that we need to mitigate stressors, and that is one part of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part is being able to actually process the stress that we've been through. And some of that is emotional and mental, and some of that is very physical.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great point. So I did an interview a little while back with Marnie Alfson. If you guys haven't seen that video, you should definitely check that out. And she talked about how she realized that if she didn't get her heart rate up, she's doing I think it was the Peloton bike after her sessions, that she was having some real trouble and couldn't, she needed to get her heart rate up. And so that was a way to really help her process her stress. And so there's probably multiple ways that we can really, approach this to mitigate, this whole process. So you were mentioning before that it's physical, but it's also emotional. So we can come out in a few different ways to help us to, help these, chronic stressors, that, because you can't just get rid of people. People are a part of ministry. Obviously, I think there's that funny saying that it's like, oh, I love ministry, it's people I don't like, or whatever. It's like, well, we all have difficult people in our life, and maybe we're a difficult person for someone else. But we do have to, realize that some of these things aren't going to be removed, but how we respond to it, how we process it is what's going to help us in our burnout, or if we actually enter burnout or not. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So how do we deal with kind of this chronic stress that can be a part of our lives? Instead of these one-off things that we feel like, oh, that was stressful, and then now I'm kind of going back to my sense of normalcy. These things that kind of pile on. But what is your approach to that? What would you advise leaders and pastors?
Yeah, I think we throw around the word boundaries all the time. And sometimes we don't necessarily reckon with what does boundaries actually look like in pastoral leadership. That's a tough place, right? Because everyone has ideas about how you should be showing up as the leader of your church.
Yeah.
And the best thing that we can do is recognize, boundary is for the purpose of your well-being and your availability to be everything God has desired for you in this time.
Right.
Now, for a short time period, for example, in times of chaos or overwhelm, we can show up in overdrive for a very short time period.
Yeah.
We have to dial it back or we will move into burnout.
Right.
And so we have to be very cognitive about creating space, number one, for simply being. And we talk about this idea of being versus doing.
Yes.
And being allows us to be available to hear that still small voice.
Right.
And to find rest and to give ourselves time to separate ourselves from the chaos of difficult people, difficult decisions, difficult processes, and move into, Holy Spirit, what do you have for me?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we may approach boundaries as, I'm doing this to people, I'm keeping people out, but really it's I think I've heard it talked about like it's your house and like your garden, it's not to keep people out, but it is to keep everything in that is right, and it's also then so that you can invite people in. It's not really about the keeping people out as much as it would appear to be. And so if that bristles against your pastoral heart, just know that communication, I think, is really important with your congregation so that people know that, hey, I'm taking this time to rest so that I can be more present with you when we do, meet. If you're just saying it in another way that doesn't communicate people's value, then it feels a little like you're giving people the brush off. But it's for, other people's well-being as well as your own, and taking care of yourself.
One of the areas that I've seen in pastoral leadership that shows up the most with burnout is pastors that have been developing within many church bodies. So moving from, like a youth pastor to an associate pastor to a pastoral branch, and never receiving adequate rest in between. So in this space, I want to speak directly to elder boards. It is so important to plan for sabbatical. Even if you bring on a pastor or a leader that hasn't had 15 years in your body, that pastor or leader likely needs a sabbatical.
Right.
Desperately.
That's a really good point. I think instead of it being like, wow, your church is really great, they do sabbaticals, it should be more of a normal practice in, just the health and welfare of those who are serving you. And again, it's for the congregation and for the pastor. So, looking at the whole picture, just realize you're doing something that is going to benefit everyone.
And I would press in also with the concept of sabbatical. Sabbatical is not simply time to rest. Sabbatical is time for rest and also growth.
Right.
So strategic growth within that rest is the key component to a very effective sabbatical, moving back into high effectiveness when coming back into play.
Right, right. Yeah, that's so good. So, really planning for, offering, conferences that they can go to, and, even time with a counselor, I think is important during times like that, so that they really do have time to process all of the ministry work that they have been doing, that maybe that part has been neglected. And so I can't wait for everyone to hear from you next week. We're going to be talking about the stress cycle in terms of prevention and how we can really prevent burnout. And so I think that's an important thing to remember. I know we've all had a lot of stress over the last year and a half, and that's been causing, people to be on that teetering edge of burnout. I know I did an assessment with my team, and just so that I'm, doing this every 3 months, so I can make sure that people are getting the care that they need. And so I think that really being able to assess where you're at, and maybe some of these signs in the stress cycle, you can help us see how to prevent this. So thank you so much, Mellisa, and I can't wait to meet up again next week.
Big thank you to His Heart for supporting this channel. If you want more information for you and those you love on mental health, go to mentalhealth.academy today.